What's up everybody? My name is Nick and I'm a super nice guy. Today I'm here to make the next video in this series in which we take visual designs and move them into realistic prototypes. This video is just going to be me applying a basic approach to creating a prototype in a pretty quick way without going into a ton of detail, but using it as sort of a method to communicate to stakeholders and engineers and other designers how I envision this thing to behave and move in a pretty loose way, I would say. So without further ado, let's jump in. Alrighty then, here we are inside of Figma. So if you recall from the last video, we created this screen here with our final visual design. I've just since then created a quick screen called transactions, which is if you click view all from here, we will go to a full list. All I've done was essentially reuse this block here, pull it over here, add an iOS back button, part of the title here, the header, and then expand this list because it'll just grow indefinitely and scroll. Cool, and one last thing to note is make sure this bottom nav is set to a fixed position when scrolling, so make sure that is ticked on. Another thing to note with these sort of components, the way Figma adds them in, if they are a bottom sticky component, they will need to have this constraint set to bottom. Otherwise, if it's set to top and the screen is scrolling and it's fixed, it might not be visible. So if you don't see it appearing in your prototype, make sure it is set to bottom constraint. Just a quick look at what that does. It's fairly straightforward. Our bottom navigation is sticky, so we can scroll independent of that navigation piece. Cool, so this already is a prototype, just a little bit. There isn't a ton of complexity going on. So some things we're gonna do are link this view all to create a push, which is this transactions page here. Another thing we're going to do is use smart animate to show a initial loading animation or transition when you first hit this wallet screen. So I'm thinking I want the card to be the hero still, the most dominant thing. We will animate that in first and then have every other element serve as the secondary, which will animate after the card comes in. Let's get into it. Let's see. I think first we will work on the main transition because I think that's going to be a big characteristic of these screens here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do for this main transition here, this initial animation load in, is we will duplicate this full screen. We're actually going to select everything. So I'm clicking these individually and shift clicking. Then I will press shift down arrow to move everything down a bit, and then I'm gonna press 0, 0 to set all the opacity to 0. So our initial state should be blank, and then we're going to copy this over and click on the card element, press 0, 0, and then we'll just go back up shift 8. So the initial starting frame here. So this is at 140, it should be 140 here at the second frame, and then the first frame it should be 148. We might want to even exaggerate this a bit more for the card and go another 8 down, so we'll say 156 on the y-axis is where this card will start. Now we're ready to animate, so the only things we have appearing is the card. So we will drag this here into that second frame, and let's say after delay, because we want this to just happen automatically, and then put that to 0, which will go to 1 millisecond. Navigate to wallet, which is just the screen we selected. We will select smart animate, and then we're going to want to do a slight bounce here. I think what we're going to want to do is do quick, and then maybe set that to 625 to slow it down a little bit. I think it feels pretty nice and smooth here. So if we just quickly check how this looks, if I just tab over to this prototype and press R and refresh it, I really like that nice smooth bounciness. It's just subtle enough where I think it adds a little delight. So now we just need to tie in the final animation, and since everything's already turned off on this, and then everything is fully turned on here, all we need to do is just essentially the same thing, where we will drag this wire from the second frame into the final frame. And for this, we'll leave it smart animate since we have a Y position set up already. And I think we're just gonna do ease out and maybe set that to 425, and we want it to actually happen again instantly. So after delay 1 millisecond, let's see how that looks. So for this here, if I come in and press R, I actually forgot that I don't really want the header to move on the Y position. I just want the elements underneath it to. So I just want the header to fade in. So we're going to reset that Y position back to default. So back over here, if I select this header, go into the design panel, it's at a Y value of 68. So we're just going to put that back there and then see how that looks once again. So that feels much better to me. Definitely going to roll with that. I think we're good to go. All right, so the remaining piece here would be just to select the view all and attach a wire over to the transactions screen. So on tap, navigate to transactions, and we're actually going to use slide in just to replicate the standard iOS pattern when you go inside a second screen. We will slightly animate over the base layer and bring in a new layer on top. For this, let's do ease out in about 325 milliseconds. And so since we're attaching this forward state, we're also going to want to think about attaching a back state. So we can drag an arrow here, although what we're actually going to do is on tap, we just want to go back. And so it's going to actually remove that wire from the screen we attached it to and say, whenever we go to this screen, this action will do the reverse and go back. So let's see what that looks like now. So if we were to press R and start from the beginning, our card appears and then the content. We can scroll around. We can say, let's view all of our transactions. We get that nice push effect sliding in. We can view all of these. And then when we're ready to go back, we hit back and it just reverses out. All right, so that was essentially it. We just created that prototype. Now, the only thing I wanted to call out was looking back at our page structure, it does sometimes help to isolate the screens from visual design and prototype. It can just help with clarity and organization. Sometimes when you're viewing visual design, it's not always appealing to look at, say, an empty screen state, a middle state, and then the final state. You might just want to see all the screens because really that is its own work, and this here is directly related to just a prototype. All right, and then just to illustrate that here, what I've created is a prototype section in the pages, and then I have my prototype listed and dated out here. 7/2 is when I made this, and it's the wallet. So I have all of the screens here and the flows attached. Whereas if I go back to visual design, we really only have the two screens, the wallet and the transactions. So organization definitely does help. Cool, we did it. That was taking our designs and then adding some movement and life to them so that we can start to think how these things should actually behave in the real world and start to communicate those ideas to stakeholders, engineers, and all relevant parties. Next in the video, we will be taking these finished designs and moving them into a decomp and handoff composition where we annotate specifically any helpful information engineers might need, and we start thinking through all of these use cases of if this happens, how should this behave? If a user does this, what should the design do? What states need to be accounted for? We will note all of those in a really in-depth and thorough way so that ultimately this thing can get built with detail and precision. If you got something from this video, please remember to like and subscribe and stay tuned for the next video. Until then, super nice guy out.